Hi, I'm Enchanting Nubia Net. Welcome back. And if you're new to my channel, welcome. Today, let's talk about tenant displacement, a huge issue, a part of reality that can happen to any one of us. In Charlotte, North Carolina, a woman named Catherine Garcia was blindsided, everyone. She had been paying her rent on time, doing the work as a responsible tenant should. But one day she finds letters in her mailbox addressed to her landlord. Now she sees notices of foreclosures and the impending sale of the building. And she's shocked because she recently moved in this building only a few months ago. Previously, she was living in another apartment that was $1,800 per rent. And now this apartment is $1,400. So she is extremely knocked off her feet right now, not knowing what to do because her lease is coming up and suddenly she's forced into a corner. And Catherine Garcia said, in quotes, she didn't do anything wrong, end of quotes. Yet, now she's being told that she may have to vacate, and it's through no fault of her own. And the kicker is, she was informed only weeks before her lease expired that the property was being foreclosed. So she moved into this apartment only months ago, meaning that her landlord already had this in mind. He had the intention to sell this property. He knew what the process was going to be even before he decided to rent her the apartment. And on top of that, there was no communication at all, no heads up as far as how her life was going to change. And this is a life crisis. That's my opinion. What do you think, YouTube family? But let me continue. So, what I do know and what I have learned through reading articles online, that under the Protecting Tenants at Foreclosure Act, tenants ordinarily have rights. So the new owner must honor existing leases. They must notify the tenants and, of course, maintain the property, meaning that you need to have your heat, you need to have your appliances fixed, all of those things. But in practice, the mechanics of power, timing, and even communication, it definitely leaves many tenants scrambling. And we know in this economy, this inflation where, you know, everything is very unstable, it is even more challenging to survive. And especially if you're in this situation where, you're learning about the apartment, the place that you have to rest your head, and you have all of your personal belongings, there's going to be a shift in ownership. And you're wondering, where does that leave you? Especially if you have children. That is very frightening for them. Your stress, will definitely be translated to them, or transferred, excuse me, to them. And it's not a good situation. It's extremely scary. But I'm going to talk more about why this matters and why this is such a very crucial situation for anyone because of the sudden displacement. You move into an apartment believing that your monthly rent and lease will be stable, not at least predictable. Then out of nowhere, someone tells you, not even your landlord. In this case, it was a realtor that tells the tenant that the building is being sold or foreclosed. You had no idea about this. You didn't see it coming. You couldn't have planned for it. And you definitely do not have a fight with an empty wallet. So imagine on top of all of this last minute, transition, this last minute crisis that you haven't been saving as much as you could because perhaps, you're not getting paid in excess at work. And then, of course, you have other, expenses. We know the food, we have the gas, we have various bills, electricity, heat, and so on. Another big factor is the lack of affordability and safety nets. So if you can't afford to pay whatever the new owner demands, or even if the conditions worse and repairs go undone, that renter doesn't have any margin of error. It's either you have to, hopefully if the person has graced the new owner and have a compassion for you, they will allow you to stay there maybe even 3 months, but that's still a short amount of time to even have 2 months or 2.5 months of rent, plus, the cost of moving, having a truck, having someone who can move your items and looking for a new apartment. It's a lot, especially if you only have a short amount of time. Another factor is the information because the landlord or seller often control the narrative and even the timing. As a tenant, the tenant only gets told when there's a legal pressure or financing demands that force a disclosure, when they're forced to tell you what is happening, when they're forced to give you an update, when they're forced to provide the appropriate information because you need to make changes, not when the tenant could realistically act. So, of course, if the tenant was respectively and professionally told, you know, 4 even 6 months in advance, you can do some planning. But last minute, it's a lot to take in, especially if you have to go to work. It's a lot of stress to even focus because looking for a new apartment, as everyone knows, and even packing up your items, arranging your items so it can be organized, get in the boxes, that's a second job in itself. So let's talk about the legal rights versus reality. Huge factor, everyone. Because even with laws like the Foreclosure Protection Act or even tenant empowering statutes, the enforcement can sometimes be very uneven. And this is from state to state because we know here in the United States, you know, the laws vary very much. And there's times you really need to have legal counsel so you can know what are your rights. No one, absolutely no one, should be paying their rent consistently and, feel that they're going to lose the roof over their head. Now, I have to say on social media, just maybe 2, 3 weeks ago, there was a case where a man who lived in Brooklyn, New York, he was renting, I believe it was a small apartment, very small. So he had his items in there. He went to work as usual. And then when he returned from work, he realized he could not get in. He could not gain access to his own apartment. You can look this up online, everyone. When he finally got in, you know what he had to do? He had to get into the back of the home. I believe he went into the fire escape, maybe on the second floor or so forth. He had to pry open that window. He found that all of his belongings, and I mean all of his clothing, shoes, everything was gone. And there were about 13 bunk beds where he lived. He didn't have any warning. No one communicated with him. He didn't know where his items were, if his items were sitting on the curb. But imagine the crisis, the shock. So this was posted, I believe, on Instagram and also TikTok. So let's continue with this news story, everyone. So new owners, they may delay their actions, contest notices, or even try to push out tenants by neglecting building maintenance. That's another way, if you're not familiar, that they have gotten tenants out, which is so sad because, for example, A landlord may say, oh, you've been living here for a long time, and I need to remodel the kitchen because your appliances, your cabinets, your fridge and everything is very old. I'm going to update it for you. Or they may say, you know what, there is water leakage in the walls. We need to work in your apartment for a few days. And then they'll purposely make a problem even bigger. Mind you, you didn't even realize it was a problem before. But whatever it is, they make sure they escalate it so that you have no choice but to find another place to live in the meantime, which usually will take a few weeks or even a few months, which is another horrible tactic. So, once again, all of these factors, are what many people in the United States are facing right now. Because the amount of videos I have seen, everyone, of, and you have seen it too, masses of people losing their jobs, masses of people being fired, masses of people um, being furloughed, saying that, oh, you're going to get your back pay in a few weeks, even though you won't usually get that payment in a lump sum. You may even at times have it, in piecemeal, stretched out for a few months. Meanwhile, your bills, you have late notices, interest, increases. So this is very astonishing, but everyone, it's time we have to know our rights, and we also need to save. Very important for us to be more frugal now more than ever, and to put money aside. Doesn't matter how much you do earn, put money aside and just be very consistent to see it grow, because you need an emergency fund. You cannot rely solely on credit cards, which have high interest, and then you have no way of paying that back. So everyone, what is your thought? What are your thoughts about tenant displacement? Have you heard of this, or have you had this experience, or know of anyone who's had this experience, especially where, like Catherine Garcia, she recently moved into this apartment only a few months ago, and now she's having to think about where she's going to live once again, last minute. So once again, everyone, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Stay safe wherever you are, and keep your head on a swivel.